And now it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Greg Stevens.
Thanks very much, Adam. This is Greg Stevens, Assistant Director for Professional Development at the American Alliance of Museums. And I'm really excited to have all of you joining us today for our webinar on building audience engagement and awareness through crowdfunding. I'm happy to be joined by my colleague Adam Lafacci, our producer from Learning Times, and especially pleased to let you all know that this program is sponsored by the Getty Foundation as part of an ongoing series of sponsorships, and of course our longtime producers at Learning Times. It's also my pleasure to have our colleagues from the Public Relations and Marketing Professional Network, PRAM, join us for today's program. And to tell us a little bit about PRAM, I'm going to turn the stage and microphone over to my colleague, Christine Lee. Christine.
Thanks, Greg. We're so glad everyone can join us for this webinar. And as Greg and Adam mentioned, it is presented by PRAM, the PR and Marketing Professional Network of the American Alliance of Museums. I'm Christine Lee, the Secretary of PRAM and a representative for the Mountain Plains region, which is hosting this particular webinar. As you may know now, as part of the AAM membership, you can now opt in to any professional network. So we'd like to invite you to join us in PRAM if you're not already a member. As a network, our job is to support your professional needs, and one way we do this is continuing education programs such as this webinar, sessions at the annual meeting, and more. We recently surveyed our PRAM members and learned what topics and learning opportunities are most appealing to you, and we're using that input to plan upcoming events and to create opportunities for regional meetups in conjunction with the webinars, for example. Registrants for this particular webinar span many departments within our museums, development, administration, PR marketing, finance, graphic design, and more. And similarly, as PR and marketing professionals, we coordinate with all of these departments at our individual institutions, and we're so glad that all of you can join us for this program. I'd like to thank Greg, Adam, our great speakers, and also Tim Hallman for making this webinar happen. And lastly, we invite you to continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn. The web link to the PRAM group on LinkedIn is part of your slide deck and on screen now. So again, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Christine. And I also want to acknowledge that our fine colleagues from PRAM helped put together some of the discussion questions that you'll see in the handout that is available to you all. And Christine, I'm correct in understanding that PRAM has arranged 4 or 5 local convenings of groups, which is terrific.
Yes, that is true.
Excellent. And I also want to give a big shout out to my colleagues at the Virginia Association of Museums who are convening for this webinar at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So thank you all for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce our colleagues for today's program who will be guiding us through this program. Miranda Gale, Yoon Lee, and Allison Peck will be taking over the stage in just a moment. Of course, our program is going to be reviewing the strategy, planning, and resources behind the Together We're One campaign, looking at messaging structure and how this program reached new audiences, and a quick look at some of the campaign results. Our goal, of course, is to help you be better able to gain insights into the process and structure of a campaign like this, to explore how to use crowdfunding to reach new audiences, and to work with sponsors and other stakeholders on a similar campaign. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to our Smithsonian colleagues for part 1, Together We're One 101.
Hi, so this is Yoon Lee speaking from the Smithsonian, and I'm going to introduce what is crowdfundraising. I'm sure that Kickstarter and crowdfunding is not foreign to any of you, but in a quick recap, I just want to tell you our micro definition of it is asking many people for micro donations for usually a specific project or cause, and usually within a specific time frame online. And we look at what makes it really so special because, you know, in general, fundraising platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and Razoo are most often used for funding small projects by independent artists and creators. And as we know how hot it's been lately and how successful it's been, it's really gained a foothold in the nonprofit community as well. As of last month, there were approximately 120,000 projects launched on Kickstarter, and about 50,000 of them have been successfully funded over the years. The types of projects that are really most successful are actually dance and theater, and the projects that are most funded are usually in the categories of music and film and video. So it doesn't necessarily transcend to the nonprofit realm very easily, and we always think about whether or not crowd fundraising is really the most appropriate source of fundraising in general to achieve revenue goals. But what it really does that differentiates itself in fundraising in general is that it so equally combines fundraising, marketing, and audience engagement.
And this is Allison. I'm chiming in from the Freer-Sackler. I'm the head of public affairs and marketing there. And one of the reasons we explored a crowdfunding campaign for this particular exhibition in the first place is that we knew we needed to build a community around this particular exhibition. We knew we needed to reach new audiences, and we knew we wanted to keep them engaged all the way through the exhibition open. But we also had to be very, very considerate of the Smithsonian brand. So we're very well known. We have a great reputation for quality, but we're also perceived as well-funded, and we're not the typical startup that Yoon was talking about. We're not trying to make a film. We're not somebody in somebody's basement. We do have the perception of being very well-funded, so that was a very fine line that we had to walk. We did want to ask if anyone out there, if you're thinking of conducting your own crowdfunding campaign, if that's maybe why you're joining us, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're planning on doing.
Great. We've just dropped that question into the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So please let us know what you have been thinking of conducting as far as your crowdfunding campaign, and feel free to elaborate there in the chat. We'd love to learn a little more.
So while we're getting responses for that, I'm going to guess that the answer is yes, because that's why a lot of people have started to talk to us about this, is they're curious about starting their own crowdfunding campaign to see how this could work for them. So we'll start by telling you a little bit more about why we chose to do our particular crowdfunding campaign. Yoon receives dozens of proposals for crowdfunding from across the Smithsonian. Ours was the first major campaign that really saw the light of day. And what she saw in our campaign were a lot of the same factors that we saw that were one of the reasons that why we initially tried to do this. We had a perfect crowdfunding storm. Not only did we have a serious financial need because this was a huge show, we also had a very hot topic. Something like 20 to 40 million people in the U.S. practice yoga. We had the ability to make headlines with this because it was both the first show on yoga and the Smithsonian's first major crowdfunding campaign. And we also had a community that was already structured around a sense of philanthropy. The yoga community is very tight-knit. They have an ethos of giving back. And as soon as people got wind of the fact that the Smithsonian was planning a yoga exhibition, we started to get inquiries from people all across the United States and across the world asking how they could get involved. So we already had this desire for involvement, and we just needed to figure out a way to channel it.
Hi, this is Miranda from the Freer-Sackler. I am a special events coordinator, but for a couple of months I had the privilege of working exclusively on the campaign. And so with this list of justifications that Allison just discussed, we were quickly out of the gate, and we originally settled on a campaign time frame of 34 days, which we ultimately extended 1 week. And with a special exhibition of this magnitude, we, of course, had a huge need for resources. And while it did not represent our full monetary need, we set our goal in the low six figures to communicate to the public that while there was a significant need above those of a typical crowdfunding effort, which, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, a donor's contribution would still make a great difference.
We did set for ourselves some ground rules going into it. The first was that this had to be relatively low cost and no cost for us. Every component had to be as cheap or as easy as we can make it. And the second rule was that we knew we needed to build in sharing and word of mouth wherever possible at every single touch point in the campaign. We knew this couldn't be just us speaking to our networks. We needed to create the perception of a groundswell of support whenever possible.
So we know that right now out there are approximately 450 crowd fundraising platforms available. And in that plethora, it's hard to decide which one you want to use. I mean, some of them clearly have better name recognition than others, but they're all slightly different, and they have different rules and different fees and scales of fees. Some are geared towards particular types of content like music, or might be particularly for the startup business. We decided to go with Razoo. And Razoo has some very unique features that we thought were perfectly applicable for us. Some of their really great bonuses is that they are a 501c3 foundation, nonprofit organization themselves. So as a donor-advised fund, they take care of tax receipting, which is a really huge benefit if you're anticipating large numbers of donations. The second thing is that they have this embeddable widget which you can host on your site, and essentially people can give through that widget as a pass-through for payment processing and never leave your site at all. And thirdly, they're DC-based, which is fantastic in terms of the access that we were able to have in communicating with them. And then finally, they do not require a goal, so you don't have to set a particular goal. You can if you want to, but also there are no penalties for not reaching that goal. There's one flat fee regardless of whether you make that goal or not, which most other platforms do not offer, and their flat fee was a very acceptable 4.9%.
This is Miranda speaking, and to spread the word about the campaign, we did not feel the need, nor did we really have the time to reinvent the wheel. So we leveraged our existing channels and customized each to fit our needs. So here is a list of materials that we created in-house, which really illustrates the full range of tactics that we use to promote Together We're One. And to the left here, you can see one of our mobile phone backgrounds that we created in-house for distribution.
One thing, this is also okay, this is Allison. We're back. But I just wanted to chime in and say we put a lot of effort into our created design materials because we could. We are lucky enough to have an in-house design department, and so we knew that for all of these materials, this was what was really easy for us to do and something that we had great access to. I saw a question go by about what is a Favvy card. They're these adorable 1-inch by 1-inch cards that you can actually print incredibly cheaply. I think we got something like 7,500 of these cards for $200 or something like that. So again, low cost and no cost is possible.
Great. So now all of our materials and communications drove traffic, not to the Razoo website as you might expect actually, but to our own custom page that we hosted at asia.si.edu/yoga, which included our donation thermometer, which you can see in the bottom right hand, our videos, our Razoo widget, and our exhibition information. And we did this so that we had an increased control of the look, the feel, the content, but also so that we could roll the domain over when the exhibition opened. So Now, if someone is interested in yoga or the crowdfunding campaign, they would not be directed to the Absolute crowdfunding page, but instead they are rolled over to the exhibition site itself. And here you can see two of our e-cards that were created internally and were shareable from our website. And here is a screenshot of our Twitter page, which was customized for the duration of the campaign. And here you see a screenshot of our inaugural cover photo update for the campaign, as well as one of our most popular campaign Facebook posts right there to the right.
So what do all of these materials have in common? I think you all noticed that they're very similar visually. We created branding specifically for this campaign, and we stuck to it. This was a total lifesaver in the long run because we ended up creating so many materials, and we ended up distributing so many materials and having other people distribute materials for us, that having really strong branding really helped carry our message and made it clear that everything was associated particularly with this campaign. And we even carried the theme over to our giving levels. So when you went to the Razoo widget to donate, you were giving a donation that really spoke back to the exhibition, such as bliss and flight, very yogic themes.
This is Miranda again. Our primary promotional material for the campaign was one main campaign video and 4 ancillary subject videos. And we really splurged on these so that, one, they reflected the production quality required of our Smithsonian branding, and 2, so that we could reuse the video down the road once the exhibition was opening. And we'll be playing the video for your viewing pleasure now.
We're making yoga history at the Smithsonian, and we need your help. We're creating the world's first exhibition on the visual history of yoga.
I'm really excited to be working on this exhibition, which brings together over 100 masterpieces of Indian art and some extraordinary prints and films to tell the amazing story of yoga and show the beauty, depth, and diversity of Indian culture.
With one of the central themes of this exhibition being the idea of the yoga body, what a paradox the body actually is, because it's both the tool of practice, but it's also what a practitioner seeks to transcend ultimately.
Sculptures and paintings created over almost 2 millennia shed new light on familiar practices, but they also illuminate hidden histories of practitioners who sought to transform themselves through yoga into immortal gods, and of women ranging from gentle gurus to dangerous flying goddesses. 10th century yoginis were fierce goddesses who flew through the night in hordes. And today, yoga continues to travel across borders.
From ancient yoginis to Karinga, we have a magical show. This is an exhibition drawn from 25 collections in Europe, in the US, in India, and bringing them here requires expertise and effort, but it also is very expensive. So to bring these objects here, to make your national museum the international leader that it should be, we need your support.
Smithsonian exhibitions are always free, but special exhibitions such as this one require special funding. Federal funds provide operating support, but we need your contribution to make these masterworks of Indian art available to all through our website, free public programs, workshops, and classes for children and adults. The power of art.
It looks like there was a little bit of a hiccup in the final campaign slides weren't shown there, but it does finalize with a slide about our social media sharing as well as our campaign title and more information on how people can get involved. So that is our video.
I'm seeing a couple questions about the video pop up. Most people ask, is that really Robert Siegel? Yes, that was Robert Siegel from NPR. He donated his time for us, which we're very thankful for. And we had it actually created by a contractor that we hired. Again, we splurged a little bit on the video. And then recently when the exhibition opened, we just cut the pieces of it out that related to the direct ask, and we had a really great exhibition promo video. So one thing that we took stock of also were our allies that we had going into the campaign. We knew that our networks, even though we have great networks, were not necessarily the networks we wanted to reach, and we also wanted to go much, much bigger than our existing network. So we tapped everyone from corporate sponsors. We had a media sponsor. We got promotional partners who were studios and yoga groups and yoga alliances. We asked Razoo for their help in promoting the campaign, which they were more than happy to do because this was also reflected really well on them. And we also got as much help as we could from our Smithsonian colleagues and our other colleagues from other museums that were involved in the campaign, just because we wanted to really magnify as much as possible the message that we were sending out. Another group of allies that were really important in the success of the campaign and in the exhibition in general are yoga messengers. These are what I would call our super fans. They're people that emailed us asking for help. They called, they got super excited. They really wanted to make a difference, and they really wanted to see this exhibition happen. And we provided a structure for their involvement through this concept of yoga messengers, where we gave them materials to send out. They hosted benefit classes. We put their names on our website, so they became a very official ambassador for the campaign. And this was a win-win because they were aligned with the Smithsonian, and they were able to show ownership over this. But we also were able to demonstrate to potential supporters that we had this great community support, especially since we were an institution reaching out to a group of relatively tight-knit yoga studios and yoga practitioners. We ended up having, I think we're at about 250 yoga messengers, and we actually still keep recruiting them. And now they help promote the exhibition itself, not so much the crowdfunding, but they're bringing in groups to tour and all kinds of stuff. We also relied heavily on the media, and this is my department's area of expertise. So we planned 3 major media announcements. The first was a press release that we spread as widely as possible. And then as soon as we started the campaign, we did a media alert saying that we started it, and at the end of it, we did a media alert that we finished it and with our results. One thing that we really benefited from in this instance, and we knew this going into it, was that the first press release was able to be the first announcement of the exhibition itself and of the crowdfunding campaign. So all of the outlets that wanted to pick up the story because of the crowdfunding angle also picked up the fact that we were hosting this exhibition, and vice versa. So it got everything from art newspaper to CNN to business journals. A lot of people captured the different angles of this, and we had some really great media coverage. So I think we're going to pause and take some questions. I see one in the parking lot from Mark. Was this campaign initiated by your marketing or development team? That's a great question. It came to us from a focus group of yoga practitioners, actually, as a proposal to them, from them. And our external affairs teams, both development and marketing, we work very, very closely together. So we batted around a couple different times, and we actually made a joint decision. I am firmly in marketing and public relations. Miranda happens to work in fundraising, and Yoon also oversees fundraising, so it ended up really being a joint effort. We also have another question about who created, we already answered that, who created your video. We did create it in-house. And the budget for the video, I believe, Miranda, you can chime in if I'm incorrect on this. I believe it was about $10,000 total when we factor in crew, post-production, and the contractor that built it. And Julie's asking, when did we start crowdfunding relative to the opening of the exhibit? Our campaign launched May 29th, and the exhibition opened in October. So it was about 6 months, a little bit less than 6 months, 5 months or so. So I think a lot of these are going to deal with results and some more gifts. So we can move on and get through the rest of this next section, and I think we're going to possibly resolve some of the other questions, and then we can come back to them at the end.
So this is Miranda speaking, and in the next section we will discuss the campaign launch, the communications and internal structure, and of course our messaging. So here is the first half of our launch structure, and we decided to go forth with the campaign just a month and a half before our scheduled launch. So it was certainly an accelerated timeline as compared to what would have probably been ideal. And as you can see, our first public announcement was 3 weeks out from launch, as Allison mentioned, which to our relief was received incredibly positively. 2 weeks out, we visited yoga groups to do some informal message testing, and 1 week out, we went full speed on internal preparations. And 2 days before the official launch date, May 29th, we had a soft launch of the landing page and Razoo page to ensure that it was glitch-free internally with the processing. And we also seeded the tip jar, as we say here, with internal and planned gifts. And this was a group decision that we made, frankly, to project the image of immediate success and to inspire that initial giving.
Now, this screenshot is actually about 1/8 of our total editorial calendar for the campaign. We planned out a daily message schedule, so we knew on any given day who was saying what to when and what the content was going to be. Some days we had multiple messaging. We usually had multiple social media messages every single day. We had different emails going to different groups every single day. But it was really truly a dance of content and trying to get everything out the door. Now, with such constant messaging, we didn't want to exhaust our audiences, nor did we only want to ask them for money all the time. So we worked with the concept of weekly themes. So every week we focused on a different aspect of the exhibition, or a quirky thing about yoga, or something we thought would really speak to people. And every week the emails, videos, blog posts, and social media spoke to that theme, so they all reinforced each other. And then we also timed in targeted correspondence to audiences such as existing donors, staff, specific interest groups, and we sent them communications in a way that they were used to receiving communications. So we would send out hard mail, or we would send out an internal email, and we factored those all into the editorial calendar.
Miranda speaking. A major component of our communication strategy was to work with partners to strategically time financial and promotional boosts so that we could best capitalize on them when we anticipated dips in attention for the campaign. So, for example, we sent out our campaign emails on Wednesdays. And so on Wednesdays, we had plenty of traffic and donations driven. But when Friday or the weekend came around, we would schedule a partner e-blast or a matching gift to spur some buzz and incentivize giving. So that was a very helpful tactic that we utilized.
This, I think, the content versus the ask, I think, is a really important question that we struggled with, and I think a lot of people are going to need to make a decision about, have a conversation about. We knew going into it that we had a lot of educating to do. We were reaching audiences that didn't know about us as the Freer Sackler. They didn't know a lot about why yoga would need to have an art exhibition. They wouldn't know why we needed the money. It's hard to explain if you're not saving orphans why an exhibition costs so much. So we spent a lot of time in our messaging just educating people, informing people, entertaining people, and then we built in the ask as more of a softer ask at the end of the message. And this had the effect of we had great awareness. Maybe we could have gotten more money, but it was a deliberate choice on our end, and it's probably an important conversation for everyone to have.
So this is Yoon Lee speaking, and what we started to realize was that, from a fundraiser perspective, the content is kind of secondary to the ask, and we don't truly, candidly, concern ourselves as much with the content, presenting content and educating the public as much as we do trying to convince them to give us money. And in general, one of the defining principles of online giving is expressing urgency. So the emphasis on urgency is quite important to succeeding in getting donations and those conversions. Traditionally, through email, you have about 30 seconds to convince someone to give a gift right then and there. And if they don't give at that moment because of the email you sent, you have, you really are in jeopardy of losing them and losing their attention if you've convinced them to open your email in the first place. So for us, the emphasis on urgency was very important, and we started to adjust our messaging so that it was much more direct and honest about how much money we needed, how much time we had to go, and so forth. And our email timing was much more aggressive during the last 3 days of the campaign, and also much more frequent.
So for our donation incentives, we actually were not able to give actual gifts to people who donated. We just had some rules we had to abide by, which was fine because we ended up being able to give people low and no cost incentives that were based more on social cachet than actual physical gifts. We gave a lot of social media recognition, things like a sneak preview of a digital version of the catalog, reserved seating at free concerts, invitations to pre-existing events. And we tried to make it special when people visit simply through things like signage, or we actually turned our Favvy cards into pins by gluing a pin back on them. You can see what Favvy cards look like. A fun intern craft project and very low and no cost.
This is Miranda speaking. So for signage in the space, we created 2 iterations of the signage, which acted both as an acknowledgement as well as an incentive. So here you see an image of the digital plaque, which we conceptualized so that names would be displayed proportionally to the donor's level of giving in a word cloud. And this was a prominent feature of online on the landing page, as well as projected in an exhibition space in the highly trafficked Sackler Gallery lobby, which certainly helped to drive donations and was also very social media sticky. So that was very helpful. And here you see the second iteration of the signage, which can be viewed currently at the entrance to the exhibition, which is now open, and which lists every donor to the Together We're One campaign, as well as our promotional partners in yoga.
This is Allison. We also kept in touch over multiple platforms, and we tried to drive people across platforms. We sent them an immediate thank you email as soon as they donated that has a really lovely staff thank you video, so a video of us thanking them directly, with a pre-drafted tweet that they can share on their network saying, I gave, I hope you will join me. We also sent them an email when their name went up on the digital plaque online, and also when it was up actually in the space, we would take a picture of it and put it up on Facebook so that they could see their name in the space on Facebook and tag themselves on Facebook. And then we've just kept in touch with them with emails when the campaign ended, when the exhibition opened, and we're going to probably do a couple more before the exhibition closes. I think we're going to pause for questions again. I'm seeing that several people would love to see the editorial calendar. We are happy to send that out. If you are scared of Excel, I wouldn't recommend looking too closely at it. And then Miranda, do you want to talk a little bit more about the digital plaque, about how that was built on the back end?
Yeah, sure. So it was sort of novel. We hadn't heard of anybody doing it, and in an initial Google search, we hadn't seen it. So the concept was quite new, and I worked with a friend who's a designer, a digital designer, and he worked in a program called Taggle to create this work cloud, and in the back end, it all had to be manually entered. There wasn't a way of directly utilizing Razu's information to stream it into this program, but we would update it a couple times daily, and although it was not real time, it ended up being, that acknowledgement method ended up being a very useful and very a popular way of spreading the word about the campaign.
I see another question about the immediate email. Yes, Razu has a functionality where you can trigger an immediate email that you can personalize, and you can also include, I believe you can include a tweet in it, and you can also upload a video that will be sent to the recipient as soon as they give. And the tax receipts, I think you mentioned this, but the tax receipts are all done within Razu, so they get that as part of their Razu gift.
Actually, this is Yoon, and we did both, actually. Razu automatically sends a thank you email, which you can slightly customize, that also serves as your receipt. And secondly, the FRIR sent a follow-up thank you email to donors as they were added to the file after donations were made. So there were two components to that, and I think that's actually a fairly good practice in itself. So you're getting an email that says it's from Razu, but then you're also getting an email that says it's from FRIR Sackler. And then there was another question about premiums, and we decided one of the benefits of using Razu is that they don't allow premiums, and that is because they are a donor-advised fund, and 100% of the gift has to be tax deductible. There was no mobile app created, by the way, because the widget itself is mobile app optimized.
So the last section, I think, is where you may have some of your burning questions answered, and is also the best source of discussion. And hopefully this will leave us for a lot of time for a lot of great Q&A. And this is our successes and opportunities for improvement section. For the planning phase, you will need much more time to plan than you think. We started planning and creating materials about a month and a half before we launched. We should have started 6 months in advance. And this time is needed for you to mobilize the teams that you want to have fundraising for you, to line up your corporate sponsors, so those people that are going to be giving your planned gifts along the line. And we also had to do a lot of work to get approvals for images and videos, especially if you're using something like loan objects in a campaign like this. You have to get very specific permissions in order to be able to use them for fundraising.
This is Miranda speaking. And a lesson learned very poignantly by those of us involved was that additional support than anticipated was necessary for the campaign. In the case of Together We're One, in terms of man hours, I committed 100% of my time and much more than a 40-hour work week to the campaign. Allison committed, 50 to 75% of her time for the duration of the campaign. And we had, of course, additional guidance from Yoon and some writing assistance. But looking back, this was an effort not to be considered a special project for one or two individuals, but a very considerable undertaking, really to be woven into the workflow of an entire, development or external affairs team. So that's certainly something to consider. And we launched our campaign with a kickoff party, and our guest list included members of the press, the Twitterati, yoga messengers that had shown early interest in being involved, as well as some of our potential donors. And we certainly found this a tactic to give the launch some initial energy, and we were also able to use it as a cultivation tool for early advocates. I would say that it is worth to note, though, that planning this launch party will take additional staff time, and so delegating it to a member of the team to free up some campaign managers' time for other communications efforts might be worthwhile. For us, it definitely gave us a lot more work to do as we were trying to figure out final glitches and work out any issues with the digital plaque and all of that. So having additional hands on deck for that planning is definitely recommended.
So this is Yoon, and in this best practices portion of this webinar, one of the things we wanted to emphasize was that really in the planning, you should plan to lean on your friends, your existing constituents, and your fundraising staff working jointly to tap both the member audience that you might already have, your major donors, particularly because you can bring them in advance, educate them about your project, and really make them feel like insiders. This is going to be so novel for most of your membership, I'm imagining, if you have members, or to your major donors, that it really takes some bringing along and coaching, and in some cases even convincing that this is a really exciting, worthwhile thing to do. And in some cases, you'll just get people who are absolutely enamored of the idea and want to support it in any way. And also depending on the level of your sophistication of your email service provider, you can prepare your email messaging for audience segmentation based on their prior giving levels, and you can create dynamic and targeted content for their specific email messages, and all of that you can do in advance. And finally, you can really leverage your board and your members and higher level donors for matching gifts and peer-to-peer fundraising. In fact, in general, I always advise to have corporate support and major donors kind of lined up, because you will want to schedule their donations throughout the duration of your crowd fundraising campaign, because ours was slightly on the longer side. I think most crowd fundraising platforms will recommend 2 to 3 weeks, and part of that is to again emphasize the urgency in giving. Ours being a little bit longer, we're more subject to having more peaks and valleys and a stretch of inactivity in the middle. So lining up corporate sponsors that you already know will give you a matching gift can create an incentive and rejuvenate interest in the middle of your campaign. And also you can solicit gifts from major donors too to be part of these challenges. And what that shows your audience as they follow along is that you're getting these kind of bursts of giving even in the middle, and success begets success. Everybody likes to see that your campaign is doing well. So rather than that it's floundering at all. So finally, we found that it was very important to understand where our conversions were coming from. So Razoo, for all of its wonderful things, doesn't actually tell you whether people are coming because they have embedded the widget on their personal website, or on any other space outside of where your own widget is embedded online, or whether they've come directly through the Razoo page itself. So you only get to really source 2 different areas of where your donor is coming from, whether they came from your website or whether they came from the Razoo website. For us, they actually enabled the customization of the widget so that we could place a snippet of code in the widget embed code that would allow you to customize it for different partners or supporters that you might want to ask to embed the widget for you. So for instance, Yoga Journal could embed a specific widget, and we could then go back and track any donations that came from the widget embedded on their site. In general, when you're working with email fundraising, If you have a good email service provider, this is not really a crucial issue because you will be able to source accurately, but we were not really able to do so, so our results are not as measurable.
Another thing we learned when we were going through this, just to keep our own sanity, is to expect the unexpected. With a month and a half of constant communication, very strange things will happen, and you just have to be able to roll with it. Alec Baldwin and his wife signed on to be our gala co-chairs right in the middle of our campaign, totally unplanned, and he decided he wanted to announce himself via tweet. You can see on the slide what we drafted and sent to his publicist to tweet, and then you can see what actually ended up happening. Not exactly a boost for the campaign, but, you know, we rolled with it. Another thing that happened was our very, very last email of the campaign never sent. It hit a technical glitch, and it was the strongest worded, we're almost to the finish line email, and it just got caught in the ether and never got out there. And right before the exhibition was scheduled to open, the government shut down. So that sort of put a hiccup in how we were going to communicate to our donors. But these things happen.
And this is Miranda speaking. Here you can see two types of communications that we used during the campaign. One on the left, which is very direct, help make yoga history, and the other more content-focused with just the campaign link to drive donations. And while in our accelerated time frame, we weren't able to commit to this best practice as much as we would have liked to, we would suggest that you prime your organization for the likelihood of pivoting so that they are expecting to be a little bit flexible in communications and to draft various versions of those communications to fit those possible needs so that if you're in the middle of your campaign and you have a lot going on, which you will, you have those resources available and already drafted.
So the results of fundraising, total amount raised out of a goal of $125,000, we raised $176,000, and we're still getting the occasional donor come in because the widget is still actually up on our webpage. Total donors, about 600, a little more than 600. New donors, actually 75% of those were brand new donors to the organization. And 22 of those gave more than once and continued to give, and some even bought tickets to the gala, which you can see pictures from the gala on there. I've seen a couple questions flow by about our average gift. Miranda, you can correct me, but I'm thinking our average gift was around $60 for individuals. Our most common gift was $25.
Mm-hmm. And the average gift without any of those large outliers was around 100.
Okay,
and including those outliers was around 100.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a couple people, this is a really fun anecdote, we had somebody that we'd never heard of before give $5,000. Just a completely new person to the organization. They had no record of giving before, but they just felt really strongly about it, and they heard about it through crowdfunding.
So this is Yoon, and again, I want to preface this with a caveat in that because most of the donations were sourced through Razoo, we don't have direct correlations from the emails that were sent out to who donated because they received an email. So we kind of had to do some fancy backtracking. So what we know for sure is that there were 143 gifts from people who had definitely and directly received that email and gave the same day. It looks like the numbers here got messed up in translation. I think that should be about $16,000 in revenue from 143 gifts. And of those 143 gifts, 71, half of them came from the last 3 emails of the series. And I would say that, again, I think something was left off, but there were 11 emails in the series altogether. 71 gifts came from the last 3 emails, and in general, on the very last day prior to the extension of the campaign, that last day generated over $9,000 of the total revenue to date. So of the donors who received emails, there were 210 gifts made for over $21,000. So these could be donors who received emails but didn't necessarily give on the day that the email was sent. And then lastly, we were able to source 134 gifts from donors who were absolutely new to the file, who never received emails at all. So possibly they could have been sourced via social media or the press or any other link to the yoga site or Razu widget.
And this is Miranda speaking. And I saw a question, how many people were on your email list? There were about 16,000 on our email list. This included our typical newsletter recipients, as well as individuals that had attended our events. So it was quite extensive. And as you can see with this data, we saw significant increases in all of our digital metrics from the campaign. One of my favorite themes was Karinga Week, and Karinga is a popular artwork in the exhibition. She's a magician from the 1930s, a famed magician from the 1930s who tended to be very popular among our audiences. And what we did is we had a Face in Whole campaign where we sent out this link to a website, and people could put their own face on the piece of art, which is public domain, so was allowed. And this, you can see on the right, that's Allison with her face in full in the Karinga. So that was a lot of fun, and it garnered a lot of attention on social media for us. So we used a lot of tidbits like that to sort of boost our numbers.
For media attention, right away we got a lot of really great stories in some major outlets. What I was most excited about was that some of the blogs and journals that really focused on the key audience for this exhibition and for the campaign came out early with incredible support. I don't know if any of you out there are yoga practitioners, but Yoga Dork is one of the biggest blogs that covers yoga, and they wrote repeatedly positive posts encouraging people to donate and encouraging people to get involved, and all the way up through the opening of the exhibition. We had a total of, at last count, I think I checked sometime in September or October, 800 million media impressions, many millions in publicity value. One of the unintended benefits was that it actually did our long lead pitching for us. So we've gotten a page in Vogue, CBS Sunday Morning, New York Times, all heard about this exhibition through the crowdfunding campaign and through the media coverage that led off of that. And I've had a lot of reporters come back to me and say, I want to do a piece on this because I know that this was crowdfunded. I wanted to see how it ended up and what happened. Our attendance is also very strong. It's hard to say whether this is because of crowdfunding or whether this is just the effect of having a great show. But opening weekend was 250% over the previous year, and to date, attendance is up 30% over last year, the same amount of time. So the next challenge that is set up for us is we have this great community. We have these donors. We have people very vested in this show, but how do we keep them staying with us after this closes? How do we keep them invested in the Freer Sackler, and will these donors stay with our organization even after the show closes? And I don't think we know that. I know that this is something that Yoon is really interested in as well.
It's so new that we'll definitely want to track kind of the return on investment and how these people behave in the future when asked for additional donations.
So that is actually the end of our presentation portion, which leaves us a really great section of time to do Q&A. Greg or Adam, is there a particular way you want to structure this, or do you just want us to keep answering questions as they come in?
No, thank you very much. Your presentation was great, and I really appreciate that you've given a little extra time to answer many of the questions that have come in already. But obviously, we have many more questions to ask. So if there are questions that any of our presenters saw that really leap out, please feel free. And Adam, you and I can jump in as well. I want to go back to an earlier question from Marcy Rodriguez, who wants to know if she noticed that you lead with the ask, and what was the thought behind doing that?
I think she was referring to the video particularly.
Okay.
We did that because we knew that the video could be taken out of context, and we wanted to make it very, very clear that it was a fundraising video from the outset. And our advisors at ResU had mentioned that if you don't get your message in the very first component of a video, it tends to get lost. I don't know, do you or Miranda, do you have any more data about how many seconds you have to grab somebody in a video?
In general, we recommend that the videos be definitely no longer than 2 minutes, and even that can sometimes feel long depending on how you've produced your video. But I've spoken with the founders of both ResU and Kickstarter, and they all agree that video is crucial to the success of a crowdfunding campaign. And they have data that signifies without a video, there's like a greater rate of failure than if you do have a video produced. And even then, they recommend producing multiple videos to show throughout the duration of your campaign.
And our colleague Suzette Sherman in Washington, D.C. wants to know, if your goal had not been achieved, would you still have done the exhibit anyway?
That's a great question, and I think that's also related to another question I saw float by about if you hadn't raised the money, what was your plan B? Almost all of us in the museum world know that once an exhibition is planned, it needs to be planned something like 3 to 5 years in advance, especially an exhibition that has more than 130 loan objects in it. So we knew the exhibition would happen no matter what. And that actually put us in an interesting messaging quandary, because how do you convince people that they needed to give to see something happen when it would happen no matter what? And we got around that a little bit by inviting people to become a part of something. I don't think we ever said in any of the messaging, do this or it won't happen. We talked about it more in terms of help us make this happen, help see this come to light, help make this as great as it can be, help pay for public programs, help this reach as many people as possible. And we're always very open about, this exhibition will open no matter what, because we have to, but it just won't have all the great components that make an exhibition incredible, the public programs, the free handouts, all that kind of stuff. And we also, going into this, we had considered, what if you reach halfway and you don't have your goal, or what if you don't achieve anything? And I think that's where the corporate support and the planned donations really come into play, where you have your corporate support and you know that you have this donation planned in order for it, in order to reach your goal at a certain amount of time.
Thanks. And one of our colleagues in Texas, in the group at the Harry Ransom Center, wants to know what tactics you would recommend for an exhibition without the broad appeal of yoga. Any thoughts?
I think that's where marketing comes in. That's part of just marketing to any audience, is finding where that audience is and who they are and what makes them care about it. Yoon, do you have any other thoughts about this?
Yeah, I've seen some similar questions around can you crowd fundraise around much smaller projects, and I think that's kind of similar or related. You know, I just want to throw out there that Kickstarter has less than a 50% success rate, and then of those successful projects, more than 91% raised less than $20,000. So that kind of gives you the scope of what crowd fundraising is generally known to do best. I've seen a really wonderful project successfully funded recently by the Phillips Collection here in DC, and it was for their Labe wax room, and I believe they had a $12,000 goal for that, and it was successfully funded, and they reached a little bit more than that actually. So I think that you can find your niche audience and you can successfully market to them, but I would say that you really have to be very careful about figuring out what your reach actually can be. We do this in general, especially online, because the conversion rate online is horrifically small, horrific. Like, you should be very happy if you're reaching 1-2% conversion, 1 to 2% conversion of your overall impressions made, and that's through a variety of sources, whether it's your existing email file or people who visit your website or your social media audience. If you think about the scope of this project and how much incredible media attention it gained, and then the actual number of conversions from those people to donors, it's not surprising to me. It's not disappointing either, but it's not surprising. So that is something you should consider when you decide whether or not you want to invest in putting a crowd fundraising campaign together. Is this really the best way to reach your goal? And if your goal is, $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000, are there better ways of reaching that number than putting your resources in a crowd fundraising campaign?
Great, thanks. And I want to take a look at Julie Carpenter's question from a little bit back. In your earlier slide, you talked about when you started the messaging, the media announcements. But when did you start this crowdfunding effort, the planning of it, relative to the opening of the exhibit?
We started planning about a month and a half before we actually launched. And I think I mentioned we probably should have started about 6 months, 6 months in advance in order to give us enough time to get everything in line before we launched.
So that was like, mid-March or early April, and the exhibition launched in October.
And Kate in Springfield wants to know, how did you decide how often to communicate so as to not fatigue your audience?
We stayed pretty much in line with our normal rate of communication with our audience and ramped it up just a little bit. We normally did 1 or 2 tweets per day, a Facebook post per day, and an email per week, which is not too out of line with what our audience normally gets. They normally get an email once every 2 weeks. And we did notice there was some drop-off, some unlikes, some unsubscribes, but the people that got added to the list far outweighed the people that dropped off.
Great, thanks. And Cindy wants to know, was there a mobile app component to this?
This is Yoon. Again, no, because the widget itself is mobile optimized. So if you get to that donation page, you will have a mobile optimized performance there.
And Debbie at the Morgan Library wants to know, how much extra time would you say was devoted to the project once you decided to go ahead with crowdfunding?
This is Miranda speaking. I'm typically a special events coordinator, but my time 100% in full was rerouted to the campaign. So for me, I was, for the month and a half of planning and for the month and a half of the campaign, essentially. 100% of my time was spent on the effort. And for Allison, she was working, when we were ramping up, 75% of her time was spent on the campaign as well. So it was certainly it was certainly an effort that required additional time and took away from other efforts that our team was working on.
And a couple of folks in the audience have asked how your campaign was received by higher-ups in your organization, and was there any pushback or negativity? And if so, how did you manage that or react to that?
Our leadership at the Freer Sackler was actually extremely supportive. We made a case for it, both fundraising and marketing. We knew that this was going to be a great marketing and public relations campaign early on. So they were actually quite supportive of it, and I think they're very proud of it now, and our board is actually thinks it's great. So we didn't ever encounter any pushback, actually, I'm pleased to say. And our development department never pushed back, but we just didn't have enough bandwidth that they were able to fully get on board, that we were able to have our entire development department work on it.
But in fact, the director of the museum coined our team Team Coringa, so there was certainly levity and excitement about the project.
And Ariel Handelman in New York asks a similar question. Was there any pushback or any of your corporate donors who were against this type of fundraising that you're aware of?
Not that we know of. Whole Foods actually thought that this was a great opportunity as soon as we approached them, because it gave them the additional viewers, the additional eyeballs. It gave them more attention, and they thought it was a great idea.
And Trish in Winston-Salem wants to know a little bit about the ratio of local giving to national or international giving. Do you have any sense about those numbers?
We're actually still breaking that down. We have access to that, but we haven't pulled all the data together yet.
Okay. And this goes back to the earlier question about would you have done the exhibit or not. You said that you would have gone ahead with the exhibit, but was there a plan B formally in place that if you didn't reach your funding goal, we would try something else, for example?
Well, in this particular case, crowdfunding was just one of many different tools that we were trying to raise funds for the exhibition. It's not the end-all be-all, and it really wasn't that large of a percentage of the total cost. So we were still doing traditional methods. There were still major gifts. There were still corporate sponsorships, other corporate sponsorships. We did have a plan B from a communications standpoint, but I don't think we ever had a plan B from a fundraising standpoint. This was just one of several different things we were trying to raise money all at the same time.
And also one of the benefits of using Razoo, again, is that you don't have to meet your goal. And we think that that was great in terms of flexibility, in that even if we don't reach the entire goal, we can point to the success of however much we did raise. Someone asked a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
About whether Razoo gets a percentage of corporate gifts lined up. And I'm going to say no, because Razoo actually allows the function for you to add large gifts that come in offline to your total balance without those having to be processed directly through Razoo. And that's a really wonderful feature as well.
Great, thanks. Here's a good question that came in from Shelley in Berkeley, California. She wants to know if you have any advice for smaller organizations that aren't the Smithsonian and how they might go about proceeding with a crowdfunding campaign like this. Some of your lessons learned that you might be able to translate.
So this is Yoon, and I'll just start off the conversation and just say, you know, again, I think that it's really important to weigh what your resources are, and we can't say definitively what types of projects can be successful and how many resources you need to apply to them. It's really how well do you know your audience and how well can you reach them? How successfully can you reach them, I think is really important before you determine whether or not you should do this for a smaller organization. That said, I have seen many examples of smaller museums and organizations that have done very well with much more limited resources, or even maybe more limited name recognition than the Smithsonian or for Sackler. So I think it's absolutely possible, and you don't have to have highly produced content to have really compelling content in any way. And that's one of the benefits of using these crowd fundraising platforms, is that they allow you to create these mini or microsites, websites through their own website that you can point to and that are fairly sophisticated. So you don't have to develop as many tools as you normally would on your own.
And a couple of colleagues in the audience have asked about some of the back-end processes. How did you handle those, such as gift acknowledgments, tax receipts, tracking donor recognition, that sort of thing?
So again, Razoo takes care of tax receipting, which is a huge benefit if you're expecting a large volume of gifts to come in. So they send automatic acknowledgments, and those are also serviceable as tax receipts because they are a 501c3 donor-advised fund themselves. So 100% of the gift is tax deductible. We then are able to download and import reports on a real-time basis from Razoo and enter those into our donor database, and are able to send out acknowledgement emails as such, and also, you know, offer records of soft or hard credit in our donor database as well.
I saw an interesting question go by about, this is Elton, about how we worked with our curator. We were very lucky in having an incredibly innovative curator who was very, very supportive of all of our efforts and did the video and helped write text and helped send out letters. So we were incredibly lucky. She actually helped to brainstorm more fundraising ideas and went out and recruited groups and went out and talked to people regarding the campaign. So she was completely gung-ho about it.
And a couple of colleagues have asked about how often do you think a crowdfunding campaign like this should be utilized? Any thoughts?
I think for us, from the Sackler perspective, we've gotten the question a lot about, will you do this again? And we will, but it has to be in that crowdfunding sweet spot that we talked about earlier in order to be able to do this. It's not, for us, it wasn't an end-all, be-all. It wasn't the fundraising, it wasn't the fundraising campaign that solved all of our fundraising problems. But we would definitely do it again if we had the right exhibition and the right cause and the right reason to do it.
Thanks. And I just want to pause the questions for a moment and let everybody in the audience know that obviously we have lots of questions coming in, and we're going to do our best to answer as many of them as possible. And in order to do that, our presenters have graciously agreed to stick around for about 10 minutes of what we like to call overtime. So we hope that you can stick around with us for a few minutes afterwards and listen to what our colleagues have to say. So with that, do you think, our presenters, Suzette wants to know, of the $176,000, how much of the percentage was raised by larger $1,000 or more gifts?
That's a great question. Miranda, do you have any of those numbers off the top of your head?
Well, what I can say is sort of the split up between individuals and corporate donors. And the corporate donations, I think that the crowdfunding campaign did incentivize some of the large giving. That, ended up being $30,000 from an anonymous donor, corporate donor, and $70,000 from Whole Foods. And then of the additional $76,000, I would say, $20,000 to $30,000 of that was probably from donations that were, $1,000 or up. And then the rest was probably those smaller donations of, $25 to $60. Does that sound about right to you, Allison?
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at, I can see the breakout, and we got 10 gifts that were over $1,000 between, 1,000 and over 5,000. And then after that, as we said, the most popular gift was in the $25 range. Most of the gifts came in at that level. And then the second most popular range was that $60 to $70 level.
And somewhat related to that, did any large gifts come to you directly rather than going through Razoo?
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. A couple of them. We had one large donation that was one of the sort of seeded the tip jar items, which came before, a couple days before the campaign even started, which was a planned gift. A couple, 500, and 1,000, even 5,000 gift was unexpected. But many of those larger gifts came from our existing high-level donors who wanted to support the exhibition through the campaign.
And Miranda, I think you answered this in the text chat, but what was the name of the software you used for the donor wall, the word cloud donor wall?
Yes, the platform that the designer used was called Taggle. It's Tagul, and it's sort of a new software system that's online that the designer had heard of and used, which was very helpful. And it was certainly, it would need to be utilized with a designer that knew how to do coding around it, which was sort of central to the success of the digital plaque.
And our colleague Shelley, again from Berkeley, wants to know where your donors live. Were they mostly mid-Atlantic? Was there kind of a spread nationally, internationally?
There was a spread. We're still breaking that down. I think we can say that there was a good portion that came locally from the DC metro area, but there are certainly national donors. We're still looking at the breakout there, so we can't say definitively.
Great, thanks. And I think you might have addressed this before, but was there any in-store marketing at Whole Foods or across the other Smithsonian museums for this particular funding project?
We actually didn't have any in-store. We possibly could have, and I think that would be a good lesson learned for us. We didn't get Whole Foods in line in time to be able to go through the in-store process. They did eventually do promotion for us for the exhibition itself in October, but we didn't get a chance to do in-store or in other Smithsonians for this particular campaign. They did put it on their Facebook, and I believe they put it on Twitter as well. Whole Foods did, as well as Smithsonian sent out an email and they tweeted for us on our behalf.
Thanks. And our colleague Elizabeth from the Cincinnati Museum Center asked earlier if you have any recommendations about online raffle and auction sites tied to fundraising events.
Online raffling and auctioning?
Right.
There are auction houses that do that specifically. I think it's pretty unrelated to crowd fundraising, though. So I don't want to recommend any particular vendors. I'm not really in a position where I'm allowed to do that.
Okay. And Megan from the National Museum of American History wanted to know how you went about identifying social media influencers.
That was an effort that was in a lot of ways done right before we invited them. I have a couple of close friends that are influencers in the DC metro area, and we reached out to yoga influencers who tweet about yoga all the time and tend to be at the forefront of the yoga Twitterati, and we reached out to them, just DM'd them and invited them as well. So it was the process wasn't necessarily thorough, but sort of who came into our sphere of awareness around the time of the campaign, and we were able to find people who had sort of been in the yoga community, which frankly we hadn't really had a connection to, just by letting them know about the exhibition and the campaign, and getting in contact online. And then of course people that just have a general interest in social media, as well as crowdfunding campaigns who had a particular interest, just it being the novelty of the Smithsonian's first major crowdfunding campaign and the first exhibition on the art of yoga. So it was really our sphere of awareness here in DC.
Great, thanks. And from a special events perspective, what other kind of events, if any, did you plan other than the kickoff party? I'm originally from special events as well, and really, when it came down to it, it was a manpower decision not to have another event, and also it just wasn't in the budget. So we did just have the kickoff event, and prior to the campaign launching, we did have involvement with events that had already been planned that we sort of piggybacked on. For example, DC Community Yoga's Yoga on the Mall and Virginia Yoga Week. Allison was able to speak a few words on the stage there, but when it really came down to it, we were trying to raise money, and of course everything needs to be low cost and no cost. So that initial campaign kickoff was the one that we could really funnel our resources for. Well, speaking of costs, if you had to estimate overall, what was the budget for your project, including staff?
Including staff time. I would say, I think it was around $20,000, and that would include, that would include the videos, that would include staff time for 40 hours a week, probably. Does that sound about right to you, Allison? I don't think we've ever calculated it in with staff time.
We haven't calculated it with staff time, but with a contractor that we hired and everything else, it was around $20,000. If you take out the video, which we've had special considerations for paying for that, I think our true hard costs for the whole entire campaign were around $2,500.
Great, and we had a question that came in a little bit ago about the gifts that had been secured prior to launching the crowdfunding campaign. I'm wondering if you might talk about that for a moment.
We actually didn't have that many of the gifts in place before we launched, and this was another reason why we wish that we could have started earlier. Is because we were securing the gifts as we were launching, as we were messaging. So we had a couple of them lined up. We had Whole Foods falling into place right at the beginning while we were launching, and they were a matching gift. But we also had a significant number of these seeding gifts come into place through the campaign as we were going through it. That's not what I would recommend, but it ended up working out okay.
And I know that you all have been talking about this being the Smithsonian's first crowdfunding campaign. Do you have any sense about whether you would be successful with another crowdfunding campaign or as successful? Any good guesses on that?
From the Smithsonian in general or specifically from the Freer-Sackler again?
Either, both.
I'm going to say yes to both. As an optimist, I think definitely, coming from the Smithsonian or coming from Freer if planned well, of course we have the potential to do it again successfully.
And one of our colleagues, Isabella in New York, wants to know if you think a campaign like this would be successful for an education program, for example, as opposed to an exhibition.
I think yes. This is Yoon again, because education can be very compellingly talked about as a cause. In some ways, it has a little bit more urgency built into it.
Miranda, Allison, any thoughts about that?
I would agree with you, and absolutely. I think that an exhibition is temporary, and an education program, the knowledge that can be imparted during that can go on forever. So in some ways, I don't know, it seems like it might be an easier sell than an exhibition, although, of course, yoga as an exhibition was quite an easy sell. But I certainly think that an educational program could be successful. And as part of our pitch, we did say that we would be having public programs as part of the exhibition. So we sort of used that educational aspect in our own campaign as well.
And I know that we are just about out of time, but our colleague Cindy Fink, who is on the PRAM leadership group, wants to know, in hindsight, would you say that the actual crowdsource fundraising is secondary to the marketing PR value, as well as driving attendance to the exhibition?
That's a great question. For our particular campaign, the value of the marketing and PR ended up being much more than the value of just the fundraising. It takes a lot of $20 donations to equal the cost of a 133-object loan exhibition. But we also knew that going into it, and we knew that when that was a benefit that we wanted to see was marketing and PR out of fundraising. If we knew that this was going to be a huge fundraising push, I think we probably would have structured it differently. We would have paid more attention to different things, and we also would have staffed it slightly differently in hindsight.
And this is Yoon. I would also chime in, though, that the number of new donors to the file and the fact that it was 75% of all the donors to this crowdfundraising campaign was a hugely impressive mark for me to witness, because in my field, acquisition of new donors is extremely difficult, laborious, and extremely costly. Getting almost 500 new donors is very, very difficult. So I actually think that that's a hallmark of our success as well.
And I think one last question before we officially close the program. Return on investment. What would you say the biggest return on investment is for this campaign? Lessons learned moving forward for the next time.
I think it depends on who you ask. I got everything I wanted out of it from a PR and marketing side of things. We had a fantastic community that is actually coming back to see the show and telling everyone about it. We had great media coverage. It really put us on the map as far as museums in the United States, which was it's an ongoing goal of ours. And fundraising, it did meet its goal. So that is also fantastic. It probably could have raised more money, but as Yoon said, we had a ton of new donors that are actually still giving. So it is yet to see what the final ROI is of the entire thing. It could end up being much more than we even know yet.
Great, thank you very much. I just want to take a moment to officially end our program now and remind you that the American Alliance of Museums has several other programs coming up the rest of this year, also PR and marketing related recorded webinars. And if you haven't had a chance to do so, you'll notice that there's an evaluation link in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Your feedback is very important to us as we plan for future programs, and I know that we will plan more programs with our PR and marketing colleagues. And I wanted to take a moment to also thank all of our presenters for sharing some really great information, and give you a couple of moments if there's any closing thoughts that you have that you'd like to add to cap off our program. Yoon?
Oh, again, I just wanted to say that great fundraising is definitely at the intersection of both marketing and fundraising and audience engagement. I feel really privileged to have worked with my colleagues on this project.
Great. And Miranda, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Of course, I'd like to second what Yoon said. I was very privileged to work on this campaign and to be part of such a novel form of fundraising. And of course, it's going to be special for each instance, each campaign, each museum, each effort. So, you know, I hope that everyone can take something away from what we've done, but to make sure that you're focusing on originality, which was really what I think made our campaign so successful. So make it your own, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thanks. And Allison, anything you'd like to add?
Well, we're very, very blessed to work with people like Miranda and Yoon. And also, our emails are in there, our Twitter handles are in there, and please, if anyone needs anything or has any questions, we're more than happy to talk you through the process and give you more details offline.
Great, and I know several people earlier had asked about your editorial calendar or perhaps some samples of what your email messages looked like. And any of that you are willing and able to share with me, I can certainly make it a part of the post-program communication that we send to our registrants. So with that being said, Adam, thank you very much for being with us from Learning Times and helping propel this program forward. And I also want to thank our colleagues from PRAM for organizing this program. And as Christine mentioned at the beginning of the program, if you are not aware of PRAM, we hope that you are now. If you are not a member of PRAM, we hope that you'll consider joining us. As an AAM member, you are free to join any of the 22 professional networks that we have available. I also want to remind you, and many of you are already joining as staff members of Tier 3 museum members, but we do have terrific member benefits available to institutions and individuals. One of the most used and most valued member benefit is our information center that provides access to online resources, sample documents, and customized research services from our information center staff. So if you haven't taken advantage of that, we hope that you'll do so. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for joining us today from wherever you are in the world. And I hope that you will join us for another American Alliance of Museums online program. On behalf of the Alliance, this is Greg Stevens, Assistant Director for Professional Development. Have a great day.